The conference room at the Wolfsschanze was thick with tension on that July afternoon in 1942. General Franz Halder stood motionless, watching in stunned silence as Adolf Hitler shredded months of meticulous planning for Case Blue. Paper flew like snow in the dim light. The Führer's voice rose to a hysterical pitch. His face flushed purple, his hands trembling so violently the veins bulged beneath the skin. Spittle sprayed from his mouth as he shouted about destiny, betrayal, and racial purity. His eyes were wide, pupils black and glassy, unfocused yet burning with a manic fire. For 2 years, Halder had convinced himself that Hitler's outbursts were the mark of a volatile genius. But what he saw that day was not genius, it was madness. Hitler ranted about phantom conspiracies, about Jewish plots and cowardly generals, while ordering German armies to attack in 2 opposite directions with forces too weak for either. The room was filled with silence, except for the echo of his voice. In that moment, Halder realized with horrifying clarity that Germany's fate rested in the hands of a lunatic. That revelation would come to others, one by one, as the war dragged on and reality shattered beneath Hitler's delusions. For Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, the moment arrived in the frozen wasteland outside Moscow in December 1941. His armies, exhausted and starving, faced the merciless Russian winter and the fierce Soviet counterattack. Von Bock requested permission to withdraw to safer positions, to save what remained of his men. The teleprinter clattered out Hitler's answer: there will be no retreat. No matter the flanks, no matter the encirclement, no matter if entire divisions were wiped from existence, every soldier would stand and die where he was. To retreat was treason. Von Bock read the order again and again, disbelief turning to despair. This wasn't strategy. It was suicide masquerading as courage. When he dared to protest, Hitler dismissed him from command. Yet the true horror came not from the order itself, but from the ideology behind it. In their final meeting, Hitler raved that Soviet resistance would crumble because the Slavs were racially inferior, incapable of endurance. When von Bock pointed out Soviet victories and German losses, Hitler's eyes glazed over. He waved away reality with a gesture, convinced that his racial theories outweighed battlefield facts. In that instant, von Bock understood Hitler didn't merely ignore reality. He denied its existence. For Heinz Guderian, the brilliant architect of Blitzkrieg, the breaking point came in March 1943. Recalled from disgrace to rebuild Germany's shattered armored forces, he approached his task with mathematical precision. The figures were grim. Germany produced 600 tanks a month but lost 800 on the Eastern Front alone. Simple arithmetic spelled disaster. In a tense meeting, Guderian laid the charts before Hitler, explaining that the Wehrmacht needed to pause its offensives, rebuild, and regroup. Hitler studied the graphs, his face expressionless, then calmly declared that production would increase because of German willpower. Losses would decline because of racial superiority. The Soviet Union, he said, would collapse within months through sheer faith in National Socialism. Guderian felt a chill run through him. These weren't delusions born of optimism. They were the ravings of a man who had replaced reason with fantasy. When Guderian dared to challenge him, Hitler accused him of defeatism and threatened arrest. The general left that meeting knowing the truth. Germany's armies were being commanded by a man who believed ideology could rewrite arithmetic. Gerd von Rundstedt's revelation came even earlier, in 1941, during the planning of the invasion of the Soviet Union. When he asked what would happen if the Soviet Union did not collapse quickly, Hitler stared as though he'd spoken nonsense. "It will collapse," Hitler said, pounding the table. "Kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will fall." Rundstedt pressed on, mentioning the vastness of Russia, the possibility of winter, the lessons of Napoleon. Hitler exploded. His face contorted with rage as he shouted accusations of treason. The comparison to Napoleon is defeatist. He screamed, "The German race is superior. Victory is certain." Rundstedt left that meeting sickened. Hitler was not planning a campaign, he was writing a fantasy. For General Friedrich Paulus, the revelation came too late. In the ruins of Stalingrad, January 1943, his Sixth Army lay encircled, starving, dying. Snow covered the corpses of thousands of his men. When Hitler promoted him to Field Marshal, The meaning was unmistakable. No German field marshal had ever surrendered. Hitler expected Paulus to die, to preserve the myth of German invincibility. As he read the message, Paulus heard the distant cries of his soldiers, freezing and hungry in the rubble. The truth struck him like a physical blow. Hitler cared more about legends than lives. The entire army was being sacrificed, not for strategy, but for theater. Paulus chose surrender over suicide, defying the Führer's death wish, and in doing so, saw the full extent of Hitler's insanity. Erwin Rommel's understanding came slowly, through 1943 and into 1944. Once Hitler's favored general, the Desert Fox had been a symbol of German triumph. But as he inspected the defenses along the French coast, he saw how dire Germany's situation truly was. The Atlantic Wall was a fade. Supplies were short, morale was low, and Allied air power ruled the skies. Rommel's reports were meticulous, honest, desperate warnings that the coming invasion could only be stopped at the beaches, and only if reality was acknowledged. Hitler ignored him. He dismissed Allied strength as weakness, claimed wonder weapons would turn the tide, and spoke of divine destiny. During one meeting in March 1944, Hitler ranted for hours about miracle rockets, invisible submarines, and phantom jets that would annihilate the enemy. Rommel sat silent, watching the delusion unfold. He realized then that Germany was being commanded not by a strategist, but by a man lost in a hallucination of his own making. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg witnessed the madness up close. By 1944, Hitler's health had crumbled. His left hand shook uncontrollably, his gait dragged, and his eyes had turned pale and unfocused. His doctor's injections, methamphetamine, opioids, and experimental tonics kept him upright, but shattered what remained of his sanity. In briefings, his moods swung violently between euphoria and rage. He shouted orders to divisions that no longer existed, demanded counterattacks from armies that had been destroyed months before. When officers tried to correct him, he accused them of treachery. Stauffenberg realized that Hitler was literally commanding ghosts, leading phantom armies into battles that existed only in his fevered imagination. There could be no reasoning, no negotiation. The only option was assassination. The attempt came on July 23, 1944. The bomb exploded, tearing through the conference room, but fate spared the madman. Hitler survived, wounded but alive, and his paranoia deepened beyond all measure. He purged his officers, executed conspirators, and continued to issue orders to divisions long since annihilated. By the final months of the war, as Soviet tanks rolled into Berlin, Hitler still believed victory was near. He promised counterattacks from armies that no longer existed and demanded miracles from weapons that were never built. The generals who remained obeyed in silence, knowing that Germany was collapsing under the weight of one man's insanity. When the war finally ended, those who had served him struggled with the same haunting question that had plagued Halder since that day in 1942. Why hadn't they acted sooner? Fear, loyalty, denial, they had all played their part. But at the heart of it was something darker, the human tendency to explain away madness when it wears the mask of authority. By the time the mask slipped and the delusion was undeniable, it was too late. Germany had been dragged into ruin by a leader who mistook fantasy for destiny, ideology for truth, and his own madness for divine inspiration.